just a little bit of story time. What would you say is your most memorable moment as a caster?
Oh man, it's tough. So, well, I said the F word once on broadcast, and that was probably the most tangible moment. But like, that wasn't super memorable for me, and it's actually like, it didn't take away from the moment. I think the F word was appropriate, but it instead of it being like the wow, that was a crazy moment in League of Legends, it's wow, that's that one time that dude dropped an F-bomb on broadcast, so that's kind of lame. No, I had a really good call once in the regular season where Rocket upset G2 for the first time, and normally you like kind of loosely plan your win moments, right? Like in the sense that you have like a general theme of what's going on, especially in big games, right? And for regular season, it's usually just like someone comes back from a lose streak. It's usually really simple. But I went really ham, and it was like, I don't remember it exactly, but it was basically there was like all that they'd beaten everybody, but they lost to Rocket. And so it was this really special moment, and it just like came to me, and I think I was casting with Crepo, and it was like it was not Splice, it was not Unicorns of Love, it was not Fnatic, but Rocket, who proved that gods can bleed. And I was like so in it in that moment, and I was like, literally it was just coming to me in my head as it went, and it was, I don't know, it felt super, super powerful. And maybe that's just because I love being over dramatic. Like it's it's so over the top, and it's so probably even cliche, right? But it did it for me. I was like in the moment, and I really, really felt it. And so that felt like probably the most powerful moment of my casting career. And that was the one that I still look back on pretty fondly.
What about that situation got you so passionate and really connected with you at that point?
I mean, I think it was just the nature of the upset, because the game was so crazy, and it was so against expectations, right? Because I think I honestly, and I can't speak for everyone on our team, just did not expect G2 to lose ever. And so there's teams that are in the middle of the pack that you accept that someone's going to upset someone, and you buy into it and you're ready. But in a situation where you absolutely do not believe that this can happen, where you are utterly convinced until the moment the Nexus falls that this team can still come back because they're so good, because they're so dominant in the regular season, it is a crazy thing to watch them get smacked and to watch them to win.
What do you find are some of the hardest champion either names or abilities, items? What are some of the ones that you tend to stumble on or that are hard to remember in the moment?
So anything with alliteration is really hard for me, because I like alliteration as it is. So anytime, the most recent one is Aurelia. W, it's called Defiant Dance. And so the second I say Defiant Dance, I just start spamming D words. It's unstoppable. I cannot help myself. Dies, duels, and it doesn't help that her stun ability is called Flawless Duet, so it's there's so many Ds, and I just keep chaining words together, and I fall in this trap pretty much every time. The only other abilities that really trigger me are abilities that are phrases that I would say anyway, like Thresh's Q being Death Sentence. Luckily, he's not being played right now, but I'll say Death Sentence, right? Because someone's dying and they've messed up and they've given themselves a death sentence, right? But it's also an ability name, so it just throws me off so hard anytime Thresh is in a cast and I want to say something like that. So anytime regular speech overlaps with an ability name or there's built-in alliteration, then it just it messes my life up.
Mm-hmm. And so if you do find yourself in that in that situation where you stepped over something or you're slurring your words, you have that moment, how do you, what's your process for pushing through or taking that second reset?
So I mean, that's actually something I struggle with. So I think that for me, the ideal state and the thing that I'm working on is so when you're, let's say, I like to get really nitty gritty in a lot of fights, but at a certain point you can't track the action anymore, and trying to keep up, you just do yourself a disservice, and that's when you trip, right? When you're there's 3 things happening at once, I can't talk about all of them. If you try, you just sound like an idiot. And so the thing that I always want to do if I start to trip is to take a step back and go from, X is doing Y to Z, and then talk more generally, this team is smashing this team in the fight, and it's hard. Because once you're in the moment and you're in the thick of it and you're looking for literally little really individual things or you're focused on one area, it's hard to take a step back. But that's the ideal state, is that once it even feels remotely overwhelming or that there's too much action for you to follow, you pick a point to focus on, or if there's a bunch of points, you take a step back, you look at it as a bigger picture, which team is winning, which abilities are important. You don't need to talk about everything.
you said alliteration might be part of this, but are there any like crutch phrases or
yes.
words? Yeah, feel those.
Yeah. So as far as crutch phrases go, I mean, you go through them weekly. Like, it's an ongoing process. I think there are some people who never get stuck on crutch words, but I think they're rare. So, oh god, my most recent one was grim. On my first day, I said this is grim for X. This is grim, 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 grim. So I'll get really stuck on adjectives, and that's probably my biggest like thing. What adjective it is though changes. It's one day it'll be something. One day it'll be something else, and it's always changing. It's always evolving. And the hope is that eventually I push my vocabulary out, because you catch it. You write it down, and then you'll have like if you're casting with someone and they know what your crutch word is, they'll actually they'll write it on a sheet of paper in big block letters, and they'll like point at it while you're talking, and eventually you're just like forced out of that habit of using that word, whether you do it yourself or you're helped by a teammate. But yeah, it changes every week. There's always almost always one on an average day. On a good day, there's none. But they change. They cycle.
Of all the metas you've been casting for, which one would you say has been your favorite?
Oh, that's really tough. It might be this one right now, just because it's incredibly interesting. I think the last year's spring split, there was the teamfight meta and it was the scaling meta. And while the first 30 minutes of the game were absolutely the most boring thing on the face of the planet, big old snooze fest, when you did get to that team fighting stage, I really, really enjoyed it, because it was so interesting to see how teams played it out, and it was so nuanced, and there was actually so many different ways to approach it in terms of where you focused, because fights ultimately came down to like whose front line died first more often than not. But you could also cast it from the perspective of the AD carry. There were so many different abilities you could talk about, and it was like consistently full on 5v5. So as a caster, while it was hard at first to adjust to, once you got used to it, you knew what to expect in every fight, so you could be so creative with how you worded things, so creative with what you focused on, whereas this meta is sprawling and it's chaotic, and you're super rewarded for adapting on the fly, but it feels almost like it's harder to like make the perfect clean call, because it's just so chaotic and there's so much going on.
And maybe it could be a factor of this current meta, or just something that you've seen kind of over time happen, but who would you say in EU is the most underrated player?
It's really tough. It's hard to underrate Wonder at this point, but he was underrated for a while. It's really hard because I don't think I'm in tune with like public perception from a wider sense of like who is good, because like Maxor's a guy who I think doesn't get enough credit and attention, but it is obviously just an insane player and is really helping his team. Yankos is another guy that's kind of fallen out of the limelight recently and hasn't been as good and is now starting to come back. So underrated is hard. I don't know who's really crazy underrated right now in Europe. I think that there's a lot of people who probably deserve a little bit more recognition and praise across many teams, but there's no one who's like critically missed in terms of being an asset to their team.
And what's your favorite item?
Favorite item in the game is... Oh my god, that's a really hard question. I really love Gunblade. It's such a cool item. It feels so good to build. You almost never get to build it on the champions I play unless you're hilariously ahead, Echo specifically, but it feels good. It's an item that just feels good.
Blitz Esports releases new videos every week. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out.